And I'm here to introduce our MC for this portion of the event, Walter Merida. And Walter is an Associate Dean of Research and Industrial Partnerships and Professor with the Faculty of Applied Science and Mechanical Engineering. Please welcome to the stage, Walter.
Well, thank you very much, Aviva, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It is a real pleasure to be here with you and to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And in fact, the first thing I would like to do is to welcome Morgan Guerin, a councillor from Musqueam, to join me on the stage, please. Morgan.
Sam Nisiaya, dear friends and relatives, and to Santa Ono. My name is Morgan Guerin, and I'm an elected councillor for the Musqueam First Nation. It's been my honor to work in that capacity for quite a few years now, actually. And one of the works I've been asked to do is to go out and provide welcomings. And they seem like they're a bit of ceremony and function, but they're actually quite a bit more. We do a lot of land acknowledgements around the Lower Mainland and around Canada now. But the difference between the two is acknowledging where you are, and then the difference between having the nation come to you and say, I've seen you, you're welcome. The Musqueam version of the welcome actually has a very deep-rooted history in where you're sitting right now. Not too distant from this area, kind of closer to where the Museum of Anthropology is, was the village of Cullahan, where our ancestors used to have a fortified village. So a fortress, where we would raise our warriors up to be just that, warriors to protect Mother Earth around where we are, to be those stewards and to make sure nothing was going to happen that wasn't supposed to happen here. So we'd look out towards the waters and have spotters out there who would see people coming from near and far. We would dispatch a group of warriors to go out, intercept them and say, do you come in peace and what is your work here? So, you look pretty peaceful. And I've been told of the work that you wish to do, to have the conversation. Conversation, which in our forum here says emergency. And this is where a lot of conversations should have started a long time ago. So I know that the work that you're doing is not only a good one, but those who have come to be present and to witness that this is also a sacred work, in that you are the ones who are being given these seeds to look, ascertain if they're yours to plant as well. And that's a good thing. One of my earliest teachings when I was a child, and I share it quite freely lately, quite freely. So if anybody's heard me do this before, they might have heard it said. But it was actually in a scolding from my grandmother explaining what the word huamuch means. And huamuch in Musqueam means a First Nation person. But it has nothing to do with your race. It means you belong to the earth. And when that was explained to me, it was, you belong to the earth like I belong to you and you belong to me. Can you sell me, son? And that's a moment when your grandma asks you that question. No. Can I sell you? Because I wish I could. But understanding that responsibility and that cycle that goes with it too. You look after your mother looks after you, and you both have a time where you both must step up and look after each other. When you're a child and young, you are there to you're there to be looked after. But when it's your mother's turn, you better have the responsibility to look after your mother. It's a cycle. And we were taught that this responsibility belongs from the time you start walking. So it's not a generation. If you're alive at this present time, it is your responsibility to do what you can. And that said, looking at what we're dealing with today, climate change. I'm a young man. I'm 43 years old. And for the last 22 years, I've worked with Musqueam as an Aboriginal fishery officer. A job that I love because I get to be that guardian, that steward for Mother Earth, following that teaching my grandmother gave me. I'm sure not doing it for the money. But that said, it gives me that opportunity and that responsibility, but sadly, it's also given me, in the short 22 years of working in that frame, also the knowledge and actually seeing how much has changed in a short pattern of 22 years. If I were to put the lens on, say, salmon for a minute, many of us know about the Big Bar landslide that happened, where the fish were now ran into an impasse and couldn't make it up, or had very delayed and a very high mortality rate of the fish that were going up to breed and spawn. So in 4 years, we're looking at a catastrophic level of return, potentially, and probably will. Very few know that we also had the worst recorded returns of salmon prior to the landslide. The other one was a little more sexy. That said, these problems don't need anything else to stand in their way to become big problems. We are there. The canary died a long time ago, and we're still arguing if it's a problem. So that said, collectively, it is a responsibility of all of us to work forward. And hence, I'm here to welcome you, understanding the word you have, but also, Grandma was also here to set the rules of how you act when you're here. So that's the second part of the welcoming. But that said, I don't see a heart or a face in here thinking otherwise, so I think it's very easy for me to say, on behalf of the Musqueam people, I welcome you to our traditional and unceded territories. And with the bottom of my heart, please take these conversations away and see if that seed is yours to plant and help to move this conversation forward in a good way. So, Haitsepka, CM, Haitsepka, thank you all. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Morgan. And I would like to now welcome to the stage Dr. Santa Ono, who has been instrumental in getting this conversation started. Santa?
Thank you very much, Morgan. Thank you for those words of welcome. And thanks for all that you're doing to protect these beautiful lands. And we need to do that together. So it means so much to us to have you here with us today. And Walter, thanks for your leadership, your direct involvement in many different projects that are transformative, and for your advice to me. And thanks to everyone for being here today in what is just the beginning of a sustained commitment by the entire academic community to thinking about all the things that we can do as a university to address the crisis and the emergency of climate change. This is something, you're absolutely right, that we should have done a long time ago. But moving forward, we are fully committed to doing everything that we can, as articulated in our declaration of December 5th that I'll talk about in greater detail. I want to welcome and thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to continue to share your ideas and perspectives around one of the most pressing issues of our time. The climate crisis has become a reality. It's actually been a reality for some time. We feel the impacts in different ways every single day. And it's your passion and your involvement as a group and those who preceded you that have been instrumental in having this institution and hopefully many others take up the baton and to really do the hard work to saving this beautiful planet. On December 5th of 2019, and I give full credit to faculty, staff, and students of this institution, following increased advocacy over the past several years, directly to the Board of Governors, to myself, and to government officials. On December 5th, because of that advocacy, and I'd like to call out specifically UBC's Climate Hub, UBC 350 in particular, and many other community members, many of whom are here today. The UBC Board of Governors joined other organizations and governments around the world and unanimously endorsed the Declaration of Climate Emergency. I'd like to say that that declaration, although I recommended it to the Board of Governors, is a community effort. It's an intergenerational document that had the direct input of students, staff, and faculty of this institution. And its strength really comes from that. It doesn't come from me. It comes from this academic community. So thanks to everyone here that was part of that. The Declaration outlines a couple of crucial areas that we need to focus on in the months and years ahead. We have very little time. We need to consider the full scope of our impact in alignment of emission reduction plans with 1.5 degrees centigrade. We need to embrace and manage decline of fossil fuel use. And as you know, the Board of Governors is working expeditiously to look at all legal issues and all financial issues to move to that place as quickly as possible. A rapid and just transition to a sustainable economy that also aligns to our commitment as an institution, as a province, to the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People. That's going to take co-design, collaborative work to get to that place. And we need to consider how we infuse climate justice throughout all of our activities, priorities, and decision-making frameworks. That's going to take a lot of work because we, like other institutions, have not been just in everything that we have done, for which we apologize. And we need to consider to support community adaptation in the face of the climate crisis. That's in a nutshell the Declaration. It's much longer, it's online, take a look at it. But the Declaration also included a commitment to establish a task force. And I think this is what's unique about it. Its strength. The strength that really was the foundation of the Declaration from its very inception. An intergenerational task force that oversees a university-wide commitment, engagement process, which this is part, that will help us collectively better understand how we can all play an effective role in responding to this climate emergency. This task force recommendation will come in phases. Because it is an emergency, we as an institution, as a task force, have committed to presenting to the Board of Governors our initial findings in June for the June board meeting. Your input today, your input online will help shape those initial recommendations to the Board of Governors. So I want to thank you for being part of this today, and I want you to encourage others to also provide input to that survey. But it is only the first phase. There's a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done. And the university is going to continue to do everything we can to support this intergenerational task force to come up with original and hopefully transformational ideas on how we as an institution, working with other institutions and governments, can address this emergency. As I said, today's forum is just part of this engagement process that was designed by students, faculty, and staff. We hope that it will be a rich conversation where there'll be hard questions asked of all of us on how we can move to a different level. I want to especially call out our students. Our students have pushed us to do better, to do more, and to be more urgent in our work. And we are listening. We should have listened earlier. And I say that for all the academic institutions around the world. We should have listened earlier, but we are ready to take quicker action and to be supportive. Whoever you are, whether you're a professor, a member of staff, an administrator, or a student, or if you're a high school student that's here because you're interested in being part of the needed change, I encourage you to speak up, to share your ideas, to be candid, to provide tough but constructive feedback, and engage in lively and respectful conversations today. We're all here with the same end, to save this planet. Every voice is valid. It's essential that we hear diverse perspectives. You don't need to be an expert because sometimes experts don't have the solutions. Sometimes it's people that are new to a situation that ask the right questions, that really are responsible for a quantum leap in how we approach a problem. And please get others across both campuses. And if you're watching me online, on both campuses, we'll be in the Okanagan campus as well, to come together, participate in the engagement initiatives, now until March 27th for a first set of engagements, but in the months and years ahead. You might ask, how do you do this? If you want to provide fulsome input that we should consider as an institution, complete the survey via www.climateemergency.ubc.ca. Encourage others to continue to attend forums such as this. There'll be a general forum, but there'll also be very specific forums. And we can't just do this centrally as an institution. This is a large organization. On any given day, if you look across both campuses, there are 80,000 people that are UBC. And from that comes our strength. Those 80,000 people fan out across this province and around the world, so that the ideas that we come up with and share can really go well beyond our two campuses. Whatever department you're in, whatever faculty you're in, you will find that there are those who are motivated and understand the emergency. And you will find others that do not think that there is a problem. Even at UBC, you will find climate change deniers. So one of the things that I call upon each and every one of you to do, because you're here, because you understand the emergency, go back to your departments, faculties and units, organize community dialogues at that level. You can find a toolkit devised by the Intergenerational Task Force at the UBC Climate Emergency website to support those events. Attend the pop-up booths that will be around campus, events at both campuses. Lastly, as I said, this is just the first phase of what we need to do. This is heavy lifting for years to come. We recognize this engagement process is being done for the first phase in an expedited manner. And we're doing that specifically for one reason, and that's to keep the attention of the board and of the wider community on how urgent this is. We don't want a year to go by before we provide significant advice to this institution and to the wider community. It is our collective responsibility. But we also are committed to a long-standing engagement process with you and those that come after you. We're not expecting to find all the answers in a short period of time. And we believe with innovations that come from this institution, from the brilliance of our faculty, staff, and students, that we will come up with new solutions in the months and years ahead. That is our responsibility. We're approaching this as the beginning of that effort. We will continue to support these activities as a university, and we will continue and we will not rest until we reverse this emergency and move towards a healthy planet where all of us and our children can thrive well into the future. We are at a pivotal time when we have the conviction, the power to do something to protect current and future human lives and livelihoods. Today we have the power to make a difference. Thank you for being an important part of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ono. Dr. Ono has always been a very tough act to follow, but in this particular situation, I have a very easy job. My job is to really get the conversation started, and as co-chair of the Climate Emergency Engagement Task Force, it's a real privilege for me to be here. I would like to touch on 2 points. The first one is just logistics. So for the first part of this engagement, we are going to have a panel discussion, and you will see some of our panelists bring expertise from across the board, from the global stage to the municipal level to the campus level. And that will go on until approximately 4 p.m. And after that, we are going to have a short break to reset the room to make it more suitable for deeper dives, if you like, into some of the actual topics. And you will find information in the desk next to the elevator for that, and also on the boards. And I want to just emphasize what Dr. Ono said. Your input is instrumental, it's invaluable as we generate the recommendations. I am an engineer, and Morgan spoke about responsibility, and Dr. Ono spoke about the huge challenges. But I also, at the back of my mind, had this thing of, I cannot think of a better time in history to be an engineer working on some of these challenges, because we also have a tremendous opportunity to make a big impact for the better. So at this point, I would like to ask our panelists to please join me on the stage. And please join me in welcoming them. I am a parent, and I have a 12-year-old daughter who every morning when she takes the bus to go to school reminds me about my obligations in relation to climate change. And I've seen throughout in the last couple of years in particular an increasing sense of anxiety when she addresses those questions. So I would like to just have a show of hands for among you who has felt worried, not just aware, but worried about climate change in the last year, in the last month, the last week. Great. Thank you for that. And absolutely, those of you who have access to my LinkedIn profile will see that I posted yesterday the latest report from the World Meteorological Organization came out. And it's not really good news. The impacts of climate change are really here now. And I think this sense of anxiety, is something that we need to address in addition to the solutions and technologies and policies that we will need to discuss. And I think part of it, from my perspective, I have felt much better by just talking to people outside my own discipline. We're just talking about the legislative implications of some of the clean energy policies, for example. We have resources at UBC, and there are some volunteers here from the Health Promotion and Education Group with information boards that you can talk to if you're feeling anxious. And I wanted to just quickly mention that because it's not just about the big, broad solutions, it's also about the personal feeling and commitment that we have to this cause. However, having said all that, I also feel that despite the daunting challenges, there is an incredible opportunity for us. And the first signs of positive change are emerging years after the Paris Agreement. So for example, in the last 2 years, for the first time, GDP growth has been decoupled from emissions growth. So until then, GDP growth was always associated with an increase in emissions. That's no longer the case. So we have demonstrated that we can grow economically and at the same time minimize the damage to the planet. In 2019, wind-powered electricity was nearly equal to coal-fired electricity. And that's an incredibly fast ramp-up in production capacity. And just in the last couple of days, in the north of Germany, the first steel furnace was operated using hydrogen instead of coal to produce steel. So, these are really transformative changes. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to take some of the things that UBC is working on and extrapolate them to the world. So, I would like to challenge our panelists today to, as much as possible, inject some optimism into the discussion. And without saying anything more, I would like to ask you to please, once again, help me give them a warm welcome. And I'm just going to take my place, and maybe we can start with Adriana, a fellow Central American, to start introducing yourself and share your thoughts on what you do personally to stay optimistic or to reduce your climate anxiety.
All right. So my name is Adriana Laurent. I'm originally from Honduras in Central America. I'm a recent UBC grad. I graduated from the Faculty of Land and Food Systems in May. I'm one of the co-founders and the current projects administrator for the UBC Climate Hub. And I've been a long time climate activism, especially drawing from my roots in the Global South. So to kind of start answering your question regarding optimism, I find that's like a bit of a tough question for me sometimes because, as I mentioned, Global South coastal nation, my communities have directly felt the impacts of climate change for years now. But I think it is possible, and it is also absolutely necessary to keep sight of the impacts of climate change while also working towards a just and sustainable future. I think on a personal level, what gives me hope is collective action. I think first and foremost, that's what's most needed in terms of addressing the climate emergency. Something else that gives me tremendous hope is also the amazing youth mobilization that we've seen in the last couple of years. And I think also just the global movement and awareness of the importance of climate justice. So I think that's something that gives me a lot of hope. On a personal level, what I do for my own climate anxiety, which I do feel, is to organize, to take action, to be involved, and to speak out. For example, in moments like these, to be able to address these issues head on, and to really kind of try and embed that sense of agency and hope with other folks as well who might be feeling the same thing. That being said, I do genuinely believe that we're in a transformative moment in human history right now, and I think that gives me a lot of hope as well.
Oh, hi, I'm David Boyd. I'm an associate professor here at UBC, cross-appointed at the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability and the School for Public Policy and Global Affairs. That's my day job, but I'm also, in 2018, I was appointed as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, which is a volunteer position which has enabled me to go to countries like Fiji and Norway and really witness firsthand the powerful and devastating impacts that climate change is having on people right here, right now. In Fiji, I visited Vunidogoloa, a village which is one of the first communities on Earth that had to be completely relocated because of rising sea levels, storm surges, and saltwater contamination of their food and water supply. It is a traumatic experience for a community that's been in a place for thousands of years to have to relocate, as you could well imagine, Morgan. In Norway, I spent some time north of the Arctic Circle with the Sami people, indigenous people for whom reindeer herding is at the heart of their culture, their economy, their livelihoods. And because of climatic changes, they are experiencing starvation of their reindeer. Reindeer, during the winter, they use their hoofs to scrape away the snow and get to their food supply. But as a result of changing weather patterns, now they're getting freezing rain in Norway, and reindeer hoofs cannot scrape away ice. So reindeer are starving en masse in northern Norway. So these are dark stories from the front lines of climate change, and one of the ways that I've dealt with this climate despair, I guess, is to write a book about environmental optimism. So this is a book called The Optimistic Environmentalist. It was extremely therapeutic for me to write it, and I learned some amazing things that actually follow up on some of the things you were saying, Walter. Like, for example, solar energy. In the world, in the year 2000, there was 1 gigawatt of installed solar electrical generating capacity. That's 1 billion watts. It seems like a big number. The International Energy Agency, which is the world's leading energy forecasters, said that if governments put the right policies in place and corporations made substantial investments, we could have 7 times as much solar energy by 2020, a 700% increase. Well, guess what has happened since 2000? We are now adding more than 7 gigawatts to the global electricity grid every month. And last year we surpassed 600 gigawatts of installed solar electricity. Wind, it's a similar pattern. With electric vehicles, we now have Norway, a northern nation, where more than 60% of new vehicle sales are electric vehicles. In terms of buildings, we're on the cusp of a transformation in the buildings industry, where places like Vancouver, California, and the European Union have laws in place that require effectively net zero buildings, buildings that are so efficient that with a few solar panels on the roof, they can produce all the electricity they need. And in terms of other issues, there's amazing things happening in terms of reforestation around the world. In China, in Africa, in Africa, there's an initiative called the Great Green Wall, which is 21 countries in the Sahel that are literally planting billions of trees to try and stop desertification and also to create economic opportunity. So they're rehabilitating farmland, they're building forests, they're increasing food security, they're decreasing poverty, and these are programs that are like absolutely phenomenal that many of us have never even heard of. So there is good news out there. There are solutions to the challenges of climate change. And once you learn about those solutions, the thing is it's really empowering to be a part of them. And that gets back to what Adriana was saying. After I wrote this book, I started a group on Pender Island where I live, and we set a goal of putting solar panels on the roof of every public building on Pender Island by 2020. So we started with the recycling center, 35 solar panels, then we did the school with 105, we did the medical clinic, the community hall, the library, and now we're working on fire hall, and it's amazing to see people come together and actually feel how empowering it is to take action to slay the dragon of climate change. So great to be here this afternoon, looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that.
So I'll echo that it's great to be here with you. My name's Christine Boyle. I have been a climate activist since I was a student here at UBC in Land and Food Systems, also about 15 years ago, and really came into climate work through a lens of people and of justice. I was elected to Vancouver City Council a year and a half ago, and as many of you I'm sure know, Vancouver has a long and proud history of acting on climate and environmental issues from the days when Gregor was leading, and before that from back to the 1990s. When I got elected, I was proud to bring forward a motion for Vancouver to declare a climate emergency, and not just to declare it, but like you're doing at UBC, to really mean it and show that we mean it. And so our staff came back very quickly with a very bold climate plan, particularly aimed at where our largest greenhouse gas emissions are and how we dramatically ramp down those emissions in line with the science and rooted in equity. So the question of my answer, like Adriana, to the question of what gives me hope is collective action, and particularly student and youth climate movements. And I find hope in those places for two main reasons. The first is I am so excited and inspired by the way that the leadership of student and youth climate movements has focused with such clarity on challenging power, and in particularly on challenging the embedded influence and interest of the fossil fuel industry across government and across all of our large institutions. The larger environmental conversation for years was about the low-hanging fruit and what we can do in our little lifestyle choices, and so I've found it so hopeful to see the youth climate movement move us beyond that with such clarity, because the reality is that the science has been clear for decades. We haven't got to this state of emergency by accident. We've got to this state of emergency because of a well-funded and well-resourced campaign of denial and delay. And so if we're going to rise to this challenge with the speed and urgency that the emergency requires, we're going to need to challenge those influences and get them out of the way to get the job done. The second reason that the youth and student climate movement gives me such hope is the clarity that it brings in terms of the need to look at climate from a justice lens, to be lifting up and amplifying Indigenous leadership and understanding really clearly the connection between climate action and land defense and land rights, the need for our climate action to alleviate and not exacerbate existing inequality, that this is a collective challenge, and we only do it if people see themselves in the movement and there's space for them to get involved.
Thank you, Christine. Gregor?
Good afternoon, everyone. Gregor Robertson, and honored to be here, honored to be on Musqueam lands, and thank you to Morgan and the community for taking care of this place, waters and lands for countless generations, and providing examples and teachings for us to carry forward in this time of crisis. I am now working in many places around the world in cities with the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. I wrapped up as mayor about a year and a half ago, and now I'm representing mayors at the United Nations, at the European Commission, European Union, multilateral development banks, various places where there's a lot of diplomacy, there's a lot of talk, and kind of a frustrating level of inaction, particularly with the national governments. And ours is not immune to those concerns. There has been all kinds of action in cities around the world. There's over 1,000 cities with leaders like Christine and those of us who came before who have put climate as a top priority, calling it an emergency, putting action plans into place. It's happening throughout the world, and that's a positive sign. And there's business and local community leaders stepping up everywhere around the world to create opportunity, but also to defend our future and our rights as human beings. So I think we've got lots of hope interspersed, but I don't underestimate the challenge we face with national governments and the influences that Christine spoke of specifically, the industries that frankly don't want to change, the money that doesn't want to move, that doesn't want to take a hit, that doesn't want to write down or take losses. The system has to change, and unfortunately, the system that we have right now is very resistant to that change. We create governments to resist change and impulse, which makes it difficult when emergencies do come along. We see how fast the world is moving right now when human health is threatened by a virus. The virus of climate change has been pounding away, devastating this planet, millions and millions of people lost to it, and countless people and animals and plants will be lost to it going into the future. It is a true emergency, but it's not being treated like that, particularly at the national level. And that's where we have to make change. That's where our politics have to be different. That's where we have to be very clear and direct in decoupling the industry and the money that is driving climate change, and that is oil and gas and carbon-intensive industries. We have to transform those industries as urgently as possible. We have to do it in our lifetimes, or this planet is going to be a whole different world and relatively uninhabitable for people like us in the future. So we have an imperative here. As I said, the hopes that I see around the world are local, are entrepreneurial, are community-based. There's so much fire, and I think we haven't seen that fire in the belly any more visceral than we see with our youth and students. So kudos to the youth, to the students here, faculty and staff who also stepped up, made sure that this university is declaring a climate emergency and pushing hard on divestment and shifting investment into climate positive investments. These are really critical steps, dealing with the money, dealing with the structure and the power and the decision making. If we don't get that right, it's going to be very, very difficult to make the changes we need to make fast enough. But there is such a powerful global movement now, again, thanks to young people and those who have been working at this and carrying this message for many years, if not generations. I see there's a lot of hope right now. There's a ton of opportunity, and I feel like success is in the wind. We just have to reach out and grab it. Thank you.
Well, I think now you can get a sense of the range of expertise that our panelists bring to the table, and I think it's very interesting what Gregor touched on, which was the tension right now between central governments as opposed to municipal governments. I think that has been a relatively rapid narrative building since the Paris Accord. It was interesting that right after Paris, at the next COP in Marrakesh, it was all the multinational oil and gas companies were at the table because they saw this was actually happening. And then a year later in Bonn, Jerry Brown, at the time the governor of California, made a big point about some of these things. And I think your comment about the development banks in particular is extremely important, because if municipal governments had access to some of the financial instruments that only central governments can access at the moment, I think we could see a lot of action happen much more quickly. So thank you for that. And as you can see, the range of expertise goes all the way from the global stage, from the global discussions all the way to the municipal and Pender Island initiatives. So from that point of view, what I would like to ask all of the panelists is, what do you see, drawing from your experience, that UBC could use to inspire our actions, number one? And more specifically, drawing from that same experience, what do you see as the role of universities in addressing the climate emergency? Universities and UBC is, I think, an extreme example of that, are microcosms of the world. We, as you know, are out in the peninsula. We operate, relatively speaking, as a municipality, and we have students, clubs, research units. So how can universities be part of this, this discussion and finding the solutions? And maybe we can start on the opposite side of the room this time.
Okay, well, I think UBC's made a good start, and there's been years of working in the right direction, I would say, in terms of partnering with the city on our goals to be the greenest city in the world and to be 100% renewable. And again, we have hundreds and hundreds of cities that have made that commitment. Big companies around the world have made the commitment to go 100% renewable. That's where things have to go as urgently as possible. Fossil fuels off the table. That starts with no subsidies, no support, nothing that supports the perpetuation of fossil fuels being burned into our atmosphere. It's actually a very simple line to draw, and it has to start right now. When we looked at 100% renewal by 2050, it looked like a realistic, but that means zero investment, all the infrastructure starts changing right now. So that the action has to start there. And decarbonizing everything to do with the university, all of the buildings. I would say, buildings, and I now work in the private sector on green buildings. And I went there because it's been the most difficult, most intractable part. It's the #1 cause of climate change, our buildings, the carbon that's embodied in them, and the fossil fuels that we burn to heat and cool them. That's what's driving the pace, literally, and we have to decarbonize our buildings, and universities have a lot of buildings, as we know. So there can be leadership with buildings, with all of the transportation, with getting more student housing here so people don't have to use transportation to get here. Be as aggressive as possible on that. I think there are already good movements on this. Divestment's an obvious one that takes away that support and subsidy to fossil fuels. And I think the food piece is a really critical one I would just flag. I was an organic farmer going back some decades, and climate, that's when I was first indoctrinated and seeing the impact on the land. And I think the moves that UBC has already started to make in shifting to plant-based diet and local is really, really important, and it's big leadership for universities. We're not seeing that yet in that many universities around the world. So again, kudos to UBC and keep pushing that pace. Those are three big ones: buildings, transportation, and food, to really accelerate the action.
Thank you, Gregor. Christine?
So I'm going to echo and build on some of that. I think the key piece for me is that we need to treat it like an emergency. So as Gregor said, I think that means some really clear lines around fossil fuel money, and I don't know what the state of that conversation is at UBC, but absolutely there can't be fossil fuel money on campus in terms of what we invest in, but also in terms of the donations or grants that are being received here. And again, on buildings, I don't know how much natural gas is being used on campus, but that needs to be a hard line. There's a really dangerous narrative in BC that fracked gas can be a transition fuel that gets us to where we need to go. That might have been true 30 years ago, but it is absolutely not true now. And there's some truth-telling that needs to happen around the province about that climate reality, and UBC could have a role in that, both in terms of how it lives it out in getting gas out of buildings and beyond. There's a huge chunk of work ahead in how we transition to this new economy and how we make sure we do that in a way that doesn't leave workers behind, that doesn't leave communities behind. And so the thing that excites me is the possibility of mobilizing the entire brain trust of this academic community in service of that cause? What does that look like in terms of agriculture? What does that look like in terms of planning? What does that look like in terms of mobilizing across the arts? That's huge and exciting for me that UBC might take on that level of commitment. And then back to, we need to do that in a way that communicates emergency. How do our actions communicate emergency? How do our timelines communicate emergency? What else are we doing that makes it clear that we are all in on this fight of our lives? What would it look like for somebody to arrive on this campus and immediately understand how seriously the University of British Columbia is taking the climate crisis?
Thank you, Christine. David?
Yeah, so I'll just agree 100% with what Christina and Gregor have said, and then add to that I think that divestment has been a controversial subject here at UBC. It's a moral and an ethical imperative to divest from fossil fuels, and it's not only that, but it's good economics. I mean, if you had $10,000 10 years ago, and you had a choice between investing in the world's largest coal company and the world's largest electric vehicle company, what would you have chosen? Well, all of us would make the right choice retroactively. But 10 years ago, if you had invested $10,000 10 years ago in Peabody Energy, your investment today would be worth zero. If you had invested in Tesla Motors, then your $10,000 invested 10 years ago would be worth about $400,000 today. So divestment is not only ethically and morally imperative, it's good economics. And the other thing I'll say is that UBC is an institution of tremendous wealth and privilege. And with wealth and privilege comes great responsibility. We as a university dedicate much less of our resources to climate change than the University of Victoria. It's time for that to change. It's time for UBC to step up and really put its money where its mouth is. We've got proposals for a new climate cluster in the Faculty of Arts, a new climate cluster in the Faculty of Science. Those things should be funded tomorrow. And UBC should continue to be a strong advocate for things like the Skyline extension out to the campus to reduce those transportation emissions. UBC should be exploring partnerships with universities in the Global South, like the University of the South Pacific, universities that are really dealing with climate change on the front lines, and yet have not even a fraction of the resources and the wealth and the potential that UBC has. So I really think UBC has done some good things. Those have been discussed. There's much more that UBC could do if it really wants to react to the global climate emergency.
Thank you, David. Adriana?
So I also just want to echo what David said. Completely agree. I think UBC is an institution of tremendous power and privilege, and I think UBC is also a very well-respected, globally recognized institution. And I think UBC, because of that, is well-positioned to try to model what a climate-just academic institution could and should look like. So I think first, as a youth, I think universities have a role in trying to shape future generations, and I think it's really, really important to start preparing youth for an increasingly uncertain future. That kind of goes back to the first topic that we talked about, which was the climate anxiety that people are feeling. So I think universities really do have a role in shaping future generations. Another point, I think, that climate change is an intersectional social justice issue. It is a cross-cutting issue that needs to be addressed in a systemic way. And I think climate justice should be embedded across the institution and should also be reflected in our partnerships. So I think the way climate justice could look like across the institution wouldn't just be through academic lenses, but also through thinking about how we build our buildings, which kind of reflects what folks were saying before. So I think it should be embedded across the entire institution. So that's the second point, and I think justice really needs to be centered in our work, not just in the outcome, but also in the process. Third, I think we have been leaders in a lot of ways when it comes to research on climate change, but I think when it comes to climate justice, we are actually learners. I think we have a lot to learn from a lot of communities who've been facing these issues for years now. So I think a little point on humility from universities is also really, really important. We have a lot to learn. So that's the third point. And then a fourth point is UBC also is trying to educate students to foster a sense of global citizenship. And as an international student, well, I was an international student, one thing that I think is really important is to also start to think about how we're pushing for climate justice outside of the geographical boundaries of UBC, and how we're pushing for climate justice outside of course, like UBC mitigation and adaptation are super important, but also thinking about how we can push outside of that too. And this is like obviously increasing the scale, but I think thinking about, again, like international with other nations or also with other universities, but also thinking about our relationships to Indigenous nations here. So I think those are kind of 4 points that I would recommend for UBC's role in addressing the climate emergency.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you. I just quickly check, how are we doing with time? Okay, great. So as you can see, lots of really great suggestions. And one thing I should point out is that the comments about the buildings in particular and the gas issue for UBC, just to give you a sense of the numbers, UBC on the Vancouver campus, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 37% compared to 2007. While at the same time growing 26% in the student population, and I think about 16% or so on the square footage on buildings. We also, until Norway beat us, we had the tallest tall wood building in the world on campus. And it's now something that is taking hold in Vancouver. But to your point, Christine, absolutely, space heating. If you want to know what's the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions on campus, is space heating. And we are working on solutions to address that very challenge. So also in terms of food security and the carbon footprint of food, we do have a farm. We're one of the universities that has a farm, and we are working with your alma mater, the Faculty of Land and Food Systems, to look at ways to drastically reduce not only carbon footprint, but also water usage in farming. So I think we can now move to the second part of the discussion, which is, given the suggestions that you see, and I'm one of them, I'm most curious about this because I do see a lot of opportunities. I am originally from Guatemala, and if you go to, and I think David has been in Guatemala, I don't know if you remember David, but when I was growing up, people who, and I knew a few of those who didn't necessarily have access to shoes every year, would take old tires and make shoes, sandals out of the tires. And the evolutionary biologists have a term for this. They call it exaptation. That is to say, when a technology or asset is used for a different purpose than what it was originally planned for. And I think one of the things that we have at UBC that not many universities have is this ability to use the entire campus as a test bed for new solutions and new concepts. So to give you a very quick example, we are taking one of the parking garages on campus, and we are aggregating as many of the electric vehicles on campus as we can. And then our plan is to, without additional investment, using only a fraction of the battery capacity in those vehicles, aggregate them into a single gigantic battery to do energy storage on campus. Now, that's a completely different use from what the electric vehicle was intended for, but we are also the first 5G campus in Canada. We have one of the most sophisticated Wi-Fi networks in North America. And we are working on the transactional side of things to make it completely transparent to the user in such a way that, one of the problems that we have is that we are out in the peninsula, so the wire that brings the electricity into the campus is only so big, and very soon we will have a capacity problem. But if we manage to shift the peak demand in the morning at 9 a.m., if everyone plugs in their car, we won't be able to charge the cars. But if we intelligently manage that energy transaction, we will be able to reduce or eliminate that need. So this is one example of solutions that UBC is developing that I think could be applicable, directly applicable to cities around the world. So with that in mind, what opportunities do you see in your work or your communities that the university can offer to influence or benefit and take action in response to the climate emergency? And maybe we can switch it to the other side of the panel this time.
So kind of a first point, I think it's also really important to recognize that, of course, there are really cool opportunities, but I think it's also our responsibility to act on climate change. Again, kind of echoing that like power and privilege conversation that we just mentioned. So I think it's a responsibility to act. And in terms of what I think UBC could be doing, I also have some points on this. So as I mentioned, climate change is an intersectional social justice issue, and there's a lot of marginalized communities who've been at the forefront of this movement for years now. And in terms of thinking about like my work in relation to UBC, I've been a community organizer for a couple of years, and I've been trying to work on shifting the narrative around climate change to make sure it centers justice, but while also kind of trying to hold myself accountable to remaining teachable and to learning with and from folks. And I think, for example, UBC has an incredible student activist community, which was something that has been mentioned a couple of times already throughout this discussion. And I think there's a great opportunity for UBC to support more student activists like C350 on issues like divestment. Also kind of centering justice and breaking down those silos within UBC to address these issues. And I think something that I think is also really, really important to start thinking about in terms of kind of the bigger picture as a responsibility is what does it look like for UBC to really, truly uplift and amplify Indigenous communities and the work that they're doing. We are on unceded lands, and I know that a land acknowledgement is really, really important, but I think it's also really important to start to kind of collectively reflect on what it means to organize on climate change and on climate justice while we are on unceded lands. So I really encourage folks to also kind of reflect on that, not just for today, but every day. So that's something that I think is really important to do within UBC as an institution and as individuals as well.
Thank you, Adriana. David?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just add to that by saying, you know, we haven't really talked much about teaching, but I think that every student who graduates from the University of British Columbia should have taken a course on climate change and sustainability so that that is part of the knowledge that they go forth into the world with. There is a tremendous amount of research being done here. That's well in hand. We've talked about divestment, investment. I also think that a piece of it is taking the knowledge that's generated and a lot of good stuff is being done here at UBC, but reaching out into the world, whether it's to municipal governments, provincial governments, federal governments, and influencing policy decisions, because we could do everything in the world to the very highest standards here at UBC and reduce our emissions on a global scale by a very tiny amount. But if we can take our research, our knowledge, our expertise, and take it out into the world, then we can multiply our influence by many orders of magnitude. And I think that's really, we should have an outward focus when we're thinking about climate change as well as an inward focus.
Thank you, David. Christine?
So I will also echo all of that. I want to speak specifically to the possible collaborations with the City of Vancouver as well, to say that the climate emergency response plan that our staff have put together and that continues to move through the city is, as I said, ambitious. I remember it being described as technically feasible but very challenging, and thinking like, yeah, that sounds like about probably where we need to be. And of course, you know, we're so close, we're next door neighbors. It makes sense for the City of Vancouver and the university to be aligning in a lot of those goals and working together and meeting them, particularly because the big areas that we need to tackle are buildings and transportation, and we're deeply connected between the university and the city in both of those areas, and so it would be great to work together on them, as well as a lot of possibilities for collaboration in terms of skill development and training for the new and emerging industries that we need, for public engagement and for public innovation. I think there's so much powerful research that happens here. Just broke my chair, in case you missed that. It's going to be fine, I'm sure. There's so much important research that happens here, public research from a public institution that should inform public decisions, you know, really matters, I think, in making sure that our solutions aren't profit-driven alone, aren't exacerbating inequality, that we tackle climate change as a public endeavor. And so to be partnering with the university in keeping that knowledge in the public good and ensuring the maximum amount of public benefit, no matter the amount of money that it could make, is really critical again, in scaling the solutions at the rate that we need. I'll echo as well that there's a huge piece of learning for us at the city as well, I know at the university, in terms of taking the lead from Indigenous communities. And I know there are amazing Indigenous students and programs and faculty across the university that we in the city could also be engaging with and learning from. So hopefully that's something we can be doing together. And finally, I just want to also echo the importance of the outward-looking advocacy piece. I have, in my year and a half in local government, seen this sort of, seeing this dynamic where it is local governments who are taking action, and so in response, there's sort of increased pressure and advocacy on local governments to do more and more, and sometimes it feels like one of the results of that is that we're letting senior governments off the hook because they're not doing anything, and we've all been banging our head against the wall for so long and asking them to. The focus becomes more local, and it's super critical that urgent action happen at that level, at the university level, at the municipal level, but it's insufficient to the scale of the challenge, and so we need to continue redirecting some of that energy at provincial and federal levels so that they also step up their game. Otherwise, we just aren't going to get to where we need to go. So we'd like to partner on that. You know, we at the city know we can't meet the timeline of the science alone. We need to do it in partnership with senior levels. The same is true of the university, and so there's a louder advocacy voice that we can have when we engage it together. And I think when we work with student activists rather than seeing them as a problem.
Thank you very much, Christine. And Gregor?
Well, lots of great points that I agreed with across the board. I appreciate all of the input. And so I would just add maybe two pieces, and one of them would be the importance of taking the great research that's being done and the leadership that's here and the entrepreneurs that are here at UBC and really scaling that on climate action and making sure we are taking those solutions, those learnings, and commercializing, supporting the business community, the entrepreneurs, to grow those ideas and come up with the next big wins out there in the marketplace. It's creating tons of jobs already, and I think we're blessed here with UBC and other universities here. We've been a driver of clean technology, renewable energy, decarbonizing, different technologies, different services. We're one of the global hubs for green buildings. That means we can demonstrate all of it here to the highest level. This should be the greenest campus in the world, bar none. Like, it absolutely should be that. So it's walking the talk here at home. But then I want to echo what David said about global citizenship, which has always been a part of UBC's identity too. And what I see out there in cities around the world, there are countless cities, thousands and thousands of cities that have nowhere near the resources or the ability to grapple with the climate crisis. It's not even on the list. It's a game of survival for the most part, and big cities, particularly I'll identify in Africa, where people are coming into the cities so fast and building informal settlements, a polite way of saying shacks and whatever they can gather materials for. The big cities of Africa are being urbanized at a pace that is unfathomable right now, and the governments of those cities can't do anything about it because you just have thousands and thousands of people coming in every week and building their own communities wherever they can fit in and around the city, wherever they can get to the work that might be there. And that scale of impact with zero infrastructure, much less green infrastructure, we have to, from UBC, from the cities like Vancouver, we have to be able to reach out and help these other cities to grapple with these change, to be able to invest in green infrastructure, to leapfrog and not make the same mistakes with transportation infrastructure and building roads and bridges and car-based transportation. There's a lot of mistakes being made, and they don't have the tools, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the funding. and support to do that. So I think it's us taking everything that we can out to helping communities around the world to deal with the climate emergency, and really making sure that the learnings that we can demonstrate here find their way into communities around the world.
Can I just add to that? Because I think it's a super interesting conversation, and I want to lift up that we also have a lot to learn from other places. I'm conscious as a Vancouverite born and raised on these unceded territories that we have exported a lot of very bad ideas over decades that have made this problem a lot worse globally. And so I think there's a real opportunity for an exchange of ideas, and UBC is in such a great place because of a strong international community to be learning a lot from the students who are coming here, whose home communities might look very different than Vancouver, and the solutions might look very different from the ones that we're proposing, and that we could learn a lot from what they're doing elsewhere as well.
Well, thank you, Christine, and everyone else for a great discussion. I hope that you're feeling as enthusiastic as I am feeling right now about the next part of the session, to really do a deep dive into some of these areas. And I think we are now at the point where I am ready to just ask our panelists to, in a minute or less, give us your final remarks, and then we will be passing it back to Aviva, correct? Yeah. So, Adriana, would you like to start?
So I didn't prepare for this last final remarks part, but I think in terms of kind of some final thoughts on my end, I just really want to make sure that the conversation around climate change is centered around justice, and it is really trying to uplift and amplify the voices of communities who have been at the forefront for years now. I think a climate emergency declaration, to me, the way I see it, is a recognition of a problem we've been facing in the Global South for years now. And I think it's really, really important to remember kind of the historic causes of climate change, and how it is, again, a profoundly, it's a social justice issue, and we can't lose sight of that in any way, shape, or form, both in the process of the work we do and in the outcomes of the work we do. And it should be reflected with our partnerships and the way we support marginalized communities.
David?
I'm going to put my United Nations hat back on for a minute and say that now that we know that climate change is causing foreseeable violations of human rights all around the world, that means that governments and businesses have legal obligations to deal with climate change on an urgent basis, to phase out fossil fuels and replace them with renewable energy, to reverse deforestation, and to transform industrial agriculture into something sustainable, and doing that all with a focus on human rights and protecting especially the rights of the most vulnerable people, and learning what we can, as you said, from Indigenous peoples. There's amazing research being done by researchers all over the world, including here at UBC, that demonstrates Indigenous peoples, where they're managing the land, where they have land ownership, you have higher levels of biodiversity, higher levels of carbon storage, lower levels of deforestation, reduced poverty. And so it's a really powerful set of research that needs to be taken to governments and say, we need to hand the land back to its original stewards, or learn from them and in what we're doing.
So I just, again, say it matters. It's so critical that we treat this emergency like an emergency. I think, as folks have been saying, there are interesting lessons that we can be learning from the response to the health emergency that we're in right now, in terms of both the way that it's being communicated, and I've been really interested and pleased to see, we're getting daily updates, very clear daily updates from the Ministry of Health. There were an important and incredible amount of resources mobilized to meet the needs of this emergency. We need to be responding in similar ways in terms of the climate emergency that we're in, and we can model what that looks like in our jurisdictions. It matters that we tell the truth about the scale of the crisis. We for a long time have been pretending we can kind of have it all, and it's not true, and it's causing more damage to perpetuate that lie than to just face where we actually are, so that we can tackle it honestly. And it matters immensely When I say tell the truth, it matters whose truth we're telling and what voices we're centering in how we have that conversation. That's a massive shift in how we're used to doing things, particularly in the context that we need to move really quickly. And some of our successes of moving quickly as a country have meant a kind of consolidating of power to get there. So it's an extra challenge that we need to move incredibly quickly, and we need to do it differently than we've done it in the past. We need to center different voices, and we need to protect those who are being impacted most. That is not a small challenge, but we have the capacity to do it. I'm certain of that.
Thanks, Christine. Gregor?
Well, I'll just close with what a few people have said to me when I've said, well, I'm really focused on the climate crisis and doing everything that I can do in my work life, shifting from being responsible for all kinds of things that happen in the city and a life where I was pulled in every direction, and now all of my work is focused on climate, and people go, oh, well, thanks for working on climate for us. And every time I think, what do you mean? Like, I'm the only one that's doing, everyone can do a lot more, and what I've found is it's incredibly inspiring and liberating to actually focus so much of my energy on a climate emergency and feeling like I can give everything I can give to it, and also a feeling like a lot of us can do a lot more, and a lot of us are going to have to do a lot more, and it's going to feel really good. It's going to counter the anxiety. And there's all kinds of channels, whether it's the social justice and human rights part of this, whether it's the technology and business side of it. Those of you that are here and deeply embedded at UBC, you can transform this campus and then broadcast that and help all over the world and be part of the transformation that happens, using UBC as that living laboratory and community. So I think we can all do a ton more. It's really, it's tapping into that resolve that we're going to double the time that we put into fighting the climate emergency personally, and not just the lifestyle habits, but actually what can you do in the world? What change can you make in the communities that you work in to make a difference right now? And what I've found is it feels really good. I know I'm making more of a difference on this than I was, and we're all going to have to do a lot more of it. So it's the right step to do, and I wish you all the best and encourage you to take more action. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gregor. Great. So we have a few minutes left, and I just want to thank you once again for all these incredibly insightful comments and stories, frankly, that have helped me anyway frame some of the work I'm doing. And I want to echo what Christine said in terms of this. It is definitely local governments that are going to be at the forefront of this. But I do agree with you that we cannot let central governments and regional governments off the hook. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done at that level. And just to give you a sense of the challenge, but at the same time of the opportunity, I mean, I think Gregor said we all can do more, but I feel like we will want to do more because it's exciting and it's a great opportunity. And to just give you a sense of the size of the opportunity, just in Canada, Minister Wilkinson at the last Globe Forum quoted some figures, and he said, even if we implemented all the policies and all the ideas that we have in the current national plan, there will be approximately a 77 megaton gap. Okay, now the numbers don't really matter. It's between 60 and 80, let's say. But just to give you a sense of what that means shutting down British Columbia or Quebec. Take your pick. So that's the size of the challenge that Canada faces by 2030. Now, from my point of view, that's a huge opportunity because as a government, if we are going to really stick to our commitments, we will have to address that gap. And whoever can come up with the solutions to address portions of that gap will make a big difference. The last comment I will make, just to follow up on David's comments on renewable energy, I think it's very important to understand the difference between electricity and energy. And the reason I use the example of steel furnace or steel making industry at the beginning is important because if you aggregate all the wind and solar and all the renewable electricity in the world, that's still less than 2% of the total primary energy supply in the world. And that is because a lot of energy is needed for chemical things, fertilizer, steel making, plastics, medicines. So it's extremely important to have that clear in our heads, that it's not just about electrifying services, it's about the chemical domain. Just to give you a very quick example, a home in North America requires 3 to 5 kilowatts, let's say. If you look at the energy transaction that takes place when one of the big jetliners gets refueled, that's thousands of times higher energy requirements. So a single airplane has thousands of times higher requirements than a home. So I only mention that because in a province like ours, which is, has the great advantage of having really accessible and inexpensive electricity, pushing clean electricity into these other domains is a huge opportunity globally. And steel making is one of the examples that is just emerging as a clear opportunity. So I'm not sure, I think at this point I would like to perhaps, if you can just stay seated while Aviva gets back to the stage, and I think she's going to wrap things up before the next part of the session.